lot. Welcome, everybody. It's Mari-Lyn Harris of Heart at Work, and the podcast show is called About Creating an Impactful Legacy. And I always find that it's creating an impactful legacy could be anything, but what is it to you? And how are you doing that in your business? And for me, it's about kindness, but for other people, it's other things. So I'd like to welcome Catharyn Baird. I think I'll pronounce that right. And as my guest today, and I'm really excited to hear more about her and her stories and what she's able to accomplish. And her topic is really about ethics. And I find that very interesting. So, Catharyn, welcome to the show. And could you mind just maybe introducing yourself and sharing about how you got started doing what you're doing now?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. Talking about ethics and how it impacts everybody's lives is one of my great passions. I am a lawyer by discipline, and I didn't like practicing law, but I knew I wanted to teach. And so I was really privileged to get a job at Regis University in Denver, thinking I was going to be teaching law. And what they did instead is I wound up teaching ethics, which made no sense to me at the time. So as I began to figure out a way to teach ethics that made some sense, I realized that for all the ethical theories that we study in school, there are two overarching conversations. One is how individuals fit within the community, and then the other is how we balance our head and our heart. So I developed a methodology for teaching that, which worked really nicely. And then because I am crazy, I moved that methodology online, began doing web-based simulations. And my colleagues said, wow, can we do this too? I said, sure. And wound up sort of inadvertently starting a company that markets and makes these simulations available to universities and corporations. But the goal, the overarching goal, is to get ethics out of compliance. Ethics is not about following the rules. It's not about following the laws. The laws change. I
Mhm.
came of age during the civil rights movement, during the women's movement, and did a lot of beginning work with affirmative action back in the day. And that line moved, and there were people who were not happy about that line moving. And so what we want to do is create a culture where
Right,
people have agreement about how to behave, not just defined by the law.
right, right. Yeah, I would think that ethics a lot of times, I'm always thinking about ethics is like how we are, how we behave. Uh, do we do good or are we not doing good? And
Right.
so, you know, love to
And
hear
the
more about how you define that too.
Well, it does. And the notion that we have is that everybody has the same value priorities. And one of the insights that I got was that these four primary ethical theories we learn about in college
Hmm.
really do represent four different ways people approach the world.
Right.
And so we began playing with, well, what would that look like? And can we identify it? And then if I approach the world in one way, what does that mean in terms of the behaviors that I think are appropriate? And it turned out there were real conflicts that cause these value conflicts are what cause, of course, the disruptions within organizations and families and communities and all the rest.
Right, right. So tell me about your game. You said that you ended up producing a game to help people, educate
Right.
people.
Well, we have three different things. We have one which is the ethical lens inventory, and I've set up a link for your listeners so that they can go in and explore that.
Right.
That one was done a bit under protest because my sister, who's my business partner, said you've got to let people know which ethical perspective they've got. I said I don't do research, but we got it and we put it together. We got it verified, and what this does is tells you your ethical strengths, your ethical weaknesses, and then how to work effectively with people who don't think like you. So that's one. The second one is a set of little mini situations where you are able to go in and practice recognizing people from different ethical perspectives, balancing different values. And then the third one is a deeper dive into real decision making where you have to harmonize different values and then put together a rationale for why you're going to go one way or the other. We
Hmm.
work to make them engaging. I do theory to practice, nothing hypothetical. How would you do this in your life
Yeah.
today to get practice in making the kind of decisions we all make on a relatively regular basis but don't think about?
Hmm. Yeah. So what would be some of those questions or things that we need to consider that we don't think about every day?
Well, one of my favorite ones that is being used a lot is you're an executive director for a nonprofit. You've got $50 million to build houses in a hurricane ravaged area. If you go with one bid, you build more houses, but you damage the environment because the way the concrete is created. And if you go with the other bid, you build fewer houses, but the environment is not damaged. So do you put fewer people in houses, but have a healthy environment? Or do you not worry about the environment to get more people in houses?
Mm-hmm.
And those are both good. Both are going to impact different ways. And then you begin to play with how you harmonize them.
Mm-hmm.
Now I did a new one this week with a group of leadership students that I was really trying to play with. How do you do artificial intelligence?
Right.
And the problem that I gave them is you're working in a retail outlet and you've got a lot of theft, and your computer guys tell you that the cameras that you've installed really can tell if someone's shoplifting or not because of the various algorithms that are emerging. And do you use that data to begin to slow down shoplifting?
Mm-hmm.
And bless their hearts, this particular class decided that if you've got shoplifters, you as the grocery store have the obligation to feed them. And so you needed to put strategies in place to give them food, to get them employed, and the shoplifting was really immaterial.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm pretty liberal, but it was like business has to have some profit margin to stay in business. You can't just give it all away.
Right.
And this particular body of learners was not engaging that conversation. So it's like, we're going to see what happens when you go to work. But they're all seniors, so we'll see what that happens.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things I like to give people, sort of a real life example of a kind of a problem they would find, and then get some experience in resolving it, and then talking to other people to see how they would do it differently.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always amazed at the differences people come up with.
Yeah, it sounds like I was just trying to think of the word as you were talking, scenarios, and it's sort of like having a business case. When we're in class,
Exactly.
we had to work on all these
Right.
business cases, but they were real ones.
Yeah.
Go find an organization that you could do a review on or business case
Right.
on, and come.
And
So
And the problem that I found with business cases, because of course, as a business faculty member, we were supposed to use them, is that all those wonderful case studies were after the problems were made.
yeah,
And you and I don't know about you, but when I have ethical dilemmas, they don't come up and say, "Hi, I'm an ethical dilemma. Let me tell you what's going to happen if you don't do something."
right,
And so I really wanted to give learners an experience of being immersed in the problem at the time when they didn't know how it was going to turn out,
right.
and they had to engage with that. The other piece that I wanted them to engage was their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Many times, what keeps us from being kind, what keeps us from being generous, are our fears.
Mm-hmm.
Our fears of, not making enough money. And in organizations, people are more afraid of being unemployed than they are of doing the right thing.
Right.
And so what we find is that fear then contributes to unethical behavior, even when people know better.
Right.
And how do you deal with that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think to have that mindset, you sort of have to be somewhat resourceful and
Mhm.
resilient.
Yes.
And I would say, I'm going to just say this, you somewhat have to be an entrepreneur in mind
Yes.
in order not to be afraid of losing your job.
Exactly.
Even though you might know your job is going to end at a certain part in time, it's like you have to almost have plan B ready to go.
Right.
Right. And so then, like you were saying, we make a lot of judgments about what we're going to do and what we're going to say, and they may not be ethical at all.
Right. What we tell students and corporate people when we work with them is you have to have your exit card. You have to imagine what you would not do and where being unemployed is preferable. Because if you haven't gone through that mental exercise, then you get caught unawares.
Mm-hmm.
And so you really have to do that imaginative work ahead of time in order to say, okay, I will not sign this document no matter what anybody says. I will not participate in racism no matter what anybody says. I will not. And then that gives you the courage
Right.
to be able to act, and the resilience. And I love the way you say that entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah. Well, because we're not taught, well, I was fortunate. My father was an entrepreneur when he was I think, when I was quite young, or my teens anyway. And so I got to see him work and struggle and everything. So I just kind of picked up that vibe. I was married with him. Yeah, my brothers and sisters, none of them, they're all job related people. So I think it's just like we're not really taught entrepreneurship. Maybe nowadays we are, but not so much back, when I was younger. It wasn't encouraged, let's put it that way.
Well, but you named it very nicely. There's an entrepreneurial mindset that seems to be just genetically or personality or dispositionally
Mhm.
part of who you are. And when we take a look, for example, the ethical lens inventory, entrepreneurs land in a particular ethical perspective where people who are more job oriented and are more company people land in a very different one.
Right.
So you can identify entrepreneurs pretty easily from this particular instrument. I didn't design it to do that, but it turned out as we've had more than 500,000 people have taken this. And so we've got some really interesting data that emerges from that entrepreneurial mindset.
Right. Right. Yeah, I can certainly see that. I can just see that from when you talk to people,
Oh,
like, get a job.
right.
Oh, I need to figure out something else.
What do you mean I'm not supposed to stay here for 30 years?
Just because you did doesn't mean I want to.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, that's so funny.
But the entrepreneurial mindset and then the having thought through what you will do gives you then the capacity to be, with your favorite work, being kind.
Mhm.
Because you're able to be respectful and kind to others when you are no longer afraid.
Right.
And in the world of ethics, which is really about how can I be a person in community? How can I live with people who think differently than me, have different behavior expectations than me? That notion of open-heartedness, that notion of generosity of spirit, that notion of listening with a gentle ears where you're willing to accept people where they are and not try to say, how can you help me today, but just really understand them as human beings makes a huge difference.
Right. Right. Yeah,
And
it's
so,
interesting you say that, because when you're in fear, you tend not to want to put yourself out there, or nor do you want to help somebody else because you're in that wanting position.
exactly.
Right.
And then it turns into meanness if you're not careful. And
Right.
then you wind up, pulling the ladder up behind you or doing any numbers of things that really don't respect each other as fully human people who are able to and should be able to participate fully in our community.
Right. Right. So
So,
a little bit more about what you're doing, and I know you've already shared a couple of stories how you work with your clients and how you help them. So what are some other types of work that you can share that you would like to know, like people know more about you?
so one of my very favorite stories is the notion that what happens to us as human beings is we have a word that we think is a common value. And so you wind up with something like truthfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working with a group of college advisors, and they were getting ready to roll out a major new program. And they had been fussing with each other for about 5 months about how to roll it out. We did the ethical lens inventory, and we discovered that people who were in the responsibilities lens define truth telling very narrowly. You have to be very precise, you have to know all the details, and they were unwilling to roll it out until the board of trustees had signed off. The people in my lens, and my guess is your lens, the results lens, said we have to give people all the information so they can make a choice.
Right.
We could say this is going to be signed off, but here's what we know now. Up in another lens, they said, well, it's really great whatever way you go, but everybody has to have the same information. So there's a lens that cares about fairness.
Mm-hmm.
And the final one said, well, whatever we decide, we have to have students respect us. So we don't want to give any bad information. And then they looked at each other and in the space of 15 minutes realized that instead of accusing each other of being unethical because they had a different definition of truth telling, they could come up with a solution that harmonized all four.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things I really want people to understand is that we have these values. We think everybody defines them the same way and that we have the same behaviors that count, and we don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you listen to someone who say, well, I believe in diversity, well, what does that mean to you?
Mm-hmm.
how would you know if you had a diverse workplace? How would you know if you, and then you begin to see what behaviors get associated with the values, and then you can work to harmonize them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the value of knowing that there's these different processes, and then not just relying on these buzzwords that we think we all share an understanding of.
There's so many buzzwords out there.
Mhm.
What is what does kindness mean to me may not mean something to somebody else,
Exactly.
right? So it's really about asking them. One of the speakers, Brian, I learned to, I had a private one-on-one call with him, and I learned a lot from him because I learned that I can ask better questions. And that is like, what isn't important to you?
Mhm.
And for me to help understand the other person. And then from that simple question, I'm able to say, oh, okay, it's a fit. No, it's not a fit. Or, okay, now I understand you better. Right.
Right. Well, we had one of the women that I'm working with is a flight attendant. And this morning, the New York Times was an article about how flight attendants have just taken the brunt of it during COVID because of all the different ideas people have. And she is well versed in the ethical lens inventory. And so she would have someone who would go and go, it's my right. And she would go, oh, rights language. Okay, here's how I can mirror back and let them know they've been heard. At the same time, we're going to get them to wear a mask.
Right.
So she was able to use, by listening to the words the person chose, mirror back their values, let them feel respected, and
Right.
then together work out a solution.
Right.
And that's the other gift of really looking at the differences in ethical values and behaviors, is
Mm-hmm.
you really can respect others, and then you can really move from difficult situations and neutralize them as you come up with a path forward that's more harmonious.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot of questions and about be willing to be open to hearing the
Mhm.
answer.
Well, there is that too. Because many people don't want to hear the answer that someone else gives,
Right.
and don't want to think about, how they're going to fit into that. And then the other piece that we do a lot with is imagination. If I were from that lens, what might I think and do?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when I first started the company, my sister was working in California. She was up out of the Bay Area
Mm-hmm.
and was bouncing back and forth to Denver. And she said, okay, Catharyn, she lives in the Fairlands. You as CEO don't get more vacation than anybody else. So you decide how much vacation you want. That's what we're going to do. So she trundled off to California. And I comes out of academic where I've got lots of time off.
Yeah.
So I decided I could only deal with a month. And so I announced the entire team, everybody's got a month vacation because Janine said, and Janine came back and said, you did what? You can't do a month vacation. I said, well, and it never occurred to her that I would do that. And it never occurred to me that her value system would say, okay, we have paid time off, we don't have vacation, we have other kinds of stuff. And so that failure of imagination is humorous 17 years later, but in the moment, it was great consternation
Right.
because neither of us had imagined what the other person might think or say was appropriate behavior.
Right. Right. Yeah. So is your sister more of company girl or?
Yes, yes, she is, and it's really very useful because I'll go off trundling on my entrepreneurial self, and she'll say, "Catharyn, do we have a contract for that? What do you think the memorandum of understanding might be? What are we going to be doing?" And so the two of us are really a good balance as long as we remember her job is to make sure that the company has form, that we have the processes we need, and
Yeah.
my job is to keep us alive with these exciting new ideas that actually do get finished as opposed to just sort of die because I go off to a new shining bauble.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's the other challenge of being an entrepreneur is the
Yes.
shining
Yeah.
objects.
Everything's more fun than actually finishing something. And Janine says, no, Catharyn, this one has to be finished before you go on to do something else. The
Yeah.
value of completion as opposed to brand new ideas. But again, in an organization or in any kind of a team or a volunteer situation, having somebody from each of the four perspectives really helps you um, choose paths forward that are going to be sound,
Right.
because every ethical perspective has a blind spot
Hmm.
where it is just oblivious to ethical missteps.
Right.
And what we have is people who become our champions by saying, have you thought about whether that's fair or not? Or what principle might be underlying that choice, and really help us come back to and be able to think through what we're doing and why in a way that can make some sense to people.
Yeah. That's a great idea. I think we should do it.
Right.
Like you said, don't stop and think of the consequences or
Exactly. Or
problems.
what other principles might be involved in all the rest of it.
Right.
I mean, we see this with COVID right now because a core conservative principle is to push decision making down to state level.
Mm-hmm.
And then a core conservative decision is pushing it down to individual community level.
Mm-hmm.
And what that has wound up with is a wide variety of methods of distributing the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
And so we wind up with a core principle that makes a lot of sense in a abstract situation, as long as you understand there's going to be all these differences in approach. And if that's not okay with you, then you may want a different approach.
Right.
And so that again is to say, these principles have a place, they have a time, but you have to think through again what it is you're going to be doing. Aretha Franklin, think about the consequences of your actions. One of my heroes.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Of course. There's always consequences because we're all
Yes,
in our own bubble, right?
that's it.
And we need to find ways to work with other bubbles.
Yes. And that's exactly what ethics is about. Is for so long, ethics it has been taught as an individual way of doing right or wrong. So you figure out as an individual what you're going to do, and that's going to be just fine. Instead of saying what this is my bubble and your bubble, figuring out how to live together.
Right.
And how do you live together in such a way that the individuality is celebrated, at the same time community is celebrated, at the same time we're able to live into some way of being together in harmony.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the ongoing tension of ethics.
Mm-hmm.
It never gets resolved. There are never right answers. All there are good questions as you begin to say, in this situation,
Yeah.
how do I want these values balanced?
Right. That's so key. That in itself is worth asking, right? What you
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
what type of clients do you really like to work with? I know you have your game, but you have other services outside of that. So,
I love to work with clients who are imaginative, who engage in the whole role playing exercise,
yeah.
and who begin to think about what implications this might have for other places. Um, I like to work with clients who aren't so committed to their own position that they're not willing to see how other people might look at the world differently.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really like working with people who look at systemic issues as well as individual issues.
Mm.
Again, one of the things I've been following is the NFL right now, because I'm a rabid football player, and they have systemic racism, and then you have individual expressions of racism. And how do you begin to sort between the systemic and the individual,
Right.
and begin to play with that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But mostly I like to be with people who engage with fun and with an open mind and an open heart.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you have to be willing to listen and be willing to change if you need to, if your bubble needs to expand or contract or,
Exactly.
mostly expand, obviously.
Right.
That's the ideal. But sometimes we all need to expand and look at ourselves and what are we doing and how are we doing it. And if we're not doing what we say we're going to do, then, we need to say, okay, what else can we do?
What else? The other piece that my work requires is radical faith. I have no idea. We reach 1,000 to 1,500 students a month,
Right.
and it's all done with the virtual game. So I have no idea who they are, where they are. And so I want the experience for them to be something that they can have their lives enriched. They can have something that's going to resonate. And so I send it out into the internet, and just don't know who's going to get it, but hope and trust that it will be something of value and it'll be what they need at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Cool. Well,
yeah.
it's been such a joy to talk with you and have a great conversation with you, Catharyn.
Well, thank you.
I'm yeah, really looking forward to learning a little bit more with about you and with you at a later time. Maybe we'll do another show. So I'd like to end the call and just say, Catharyn, thank you for joining us. And, you know, I like to say, just be kind to each other because that's all we have. So,
Yes.
you know, whether we're being ethical about it or if we're just being generous about it, be kind, be kind. So there we go. Thank you very much, Catherine.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Okay, bye-bye.